Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bruce Heterick. I work with JSTOR and with Portico, and thanks everyone for postponing your happy hour for a little while so you can come and listen about discovery. Doesn't seem like a real good trade-off, but we'll work with it from there. I am happy to be here today talking about some of the stuff that I personally have been working on for the past year and a half, but we've really been diving into really for the last 9 months. And I'm really excited today to talk about some of the stuff that we found out. I did a talk about a year and a half ago talking about Plato's cave and talking about discovery and in some sense the lack of transparency that existed at that point in time and understanding what was happening and how things worked. And so the people at Charleston asked me to do a reprise of this, which I'm calling Revisiting Plato's Cave. Now that we have a little more information, a little more data, and I thought it'd be really interesting to share what we're seeing as a content provider, and a fairly unique content provider in that way. I want to make sure we state that up front. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about today certainly should not be applied across all of publishing, and trying to recognize the fact that JSTOR is a backfile content primarily. We have some current journals and we have some books, but what people primarily know us for is the backfile content of the 2,000 journals that we have on the platform. So I'm going to try to go through this information relatively quickly, so we leave a lot of time for questions, because I think there'll be a lot of questions at the end of this. And to me, that's the most interesting part, so we'll do our best. And if there aren't a lot of questions, then happy hour can start sooner than we expected. The first thing I want to do is I want to give thanks, because this has been a lot of effort, a lot of work. We worked, many of you know Jenny Walker. She was actually going to present with me today. She is in South Africa, so it was very difficult for her to get away from what she was doing to come today, so I'm going to be doing this solo. But she did a tremendous amount of work with us in the research that we did. And then two folks at JSTOR, just to give you a sense of the importance of these things, we actually have built an analytics team in JSTOR to really start to understand this data in a much better way, a much more robust way. And this is the beginning of some of this work, particularly some of the stuff that Ross Housewright, our senior data analyst, is doing. And many of you know Ross's name from the Ithaca S&R surveys that have, faculty surveys that have gone on in the past. So they were instrumental in getting us to the point that we've gotten to here. I alluded to this earlier in a presentation this morning. This kind of gives you a sense of where we see content accesses happen at JSTOR, the origin of those content accesses. And to us, when I say content access, I'm talking about an article download or an article view. That's what a content access means to us. And this gives you a sense of where people are starting when they actually when we see a content access. So you can see a large percentage of people start at JSTOR, 33% there. We see a lot of content accesses coming from Google Scholar. Institution is things typically that have the .edu domain that we see in the list of referrers that come from a particular institution. We have a lot of linking partners, people like Research Papers in Economics or MathSciNet. We have 54 or something linking partners that come to us. These self-refers are typically people who are either linking within JSTOR, or they came to JSTOR perhaps from another place, their session ended and they restarted in JSTOR. So in some sense, we call them self-referrers because of that, because of those two main categories. And then I've put up here this because we see 5% of our traffic driven through the Serial Solutions domain name, which really is their link resolver. Now, one of the really interesting things that has come out of this over the past year is that we really can't tell what comes from a discovery service versus what comes through a link resolver, because it's really hidden by the link resolver. And one of the very clear things that came out of this in working with all the providers, and one of the things we're going to immediately begin to address with them, is establishing origins for these discovery servers so that we can see when something starts at EDS or starts at Primo or starts at Summon, we can actually tell it's coming from there and it's not being overwritten by the link resolver. So we're going to be working on that immediately. We've had a great collaboration with all these discovery providers in this, and we've learned a lot on both sides. And so that's just one of the things I wanted to mention up front. So I talked about the high percentage of people who start at JSTOR, and it was brought up earlier today that, well, perhaps that's because JSTOR is a unique place. It has a certain brand recognition amongst faculty, amongst students. And there's something to be said about that for sure, but I think that signals the importance of we're looking at this from one content provider's point of view. So it's really important that we don't try to make too many assumptions or carry forward too many assumptions from that. We get a lot of content accesses, a lot of referrals from Google. We get a lot less than we used to. And many of you in this room, particularly the publishers, know that about 1.5 years ago, Google changed their ranking algorithm, which really disproportionately affected publishers that have paywalls, because Google began promoting free content first. So we've seen our Google referrals drop quite a bit. Now, we've been working with Google to make them understand that there's actually a hole in this philosophy, because in essence, if you're a librarian in here, you have paid for this content. It is free to your constituents, yet when they search for it in Google, they're not going to see it that way. Many times they fall out of the rankings altogether. Many times it just falls way down in the rankings. So we're trying to figure out a way to sort of close that gap, close that hole. And as much as you can do that with the folks at Google, because oftentimes it's really even hard to talk to someone there. But we've been fortunate. We've been able to get through to some people, and we're trying to see if we can actually do something, because other publishers have mentioned this to them about this gap. We see a lot of traffic from Google Scholar. Many of you have put your link resolvers into Google Scholar, and we see links coming from those. So the reason I wanted to tie these together is that probably the Google Scholar number here is underrepresented, because actually a lot of that, what you see here is really stuff that has come from Google Scholar, not through a link resolver. If it came through a link resolver, it probably came through Serial Solutions or SFX or Link Source or something of that nature. So the Google Scholar number here is underrepresented for sure. And the institution, the reason I tied this in this way is some people have named their link resolvers or their discovery services with an .edu domain. So to those, that looks to us like it's coming through an institution, and I count an institutional origin as something like LibGuides or your online catalog or something of that nature. Okay, so this is to say to everybody here that, sorry, I'll go back, that the amount of content accesses that we're seeing come through web discovery services is pretty small compared to the other things that we have to deal with. And frankly, for us, when you look at this chart, the main thing that we're working on is how do we make the people who are starting at JSTOR have a better experience? You know, how do we help that 48%? And then we're focused on Google. How do we affect that? So it's not that the web discovery services aren't important. They are, but they're important for a smaller percentage of the people coming to JSTOR in our particular situation. So over the past 2 years, I've been doing a lot of usage analysis for institutions, and we've been looking at the trends of how usage has changed over time. And what we have begun to see is some of these, I'm bringing this up as an illustrative example. This is a small institution in the US. This was their counter usage to JSTOR in 2011. This was their counter usage in 2012. At this particular institution, their usage dropped 24%, right? Now, normally, well, that did raise a red flag. because I started to see a few of these, not just one or two, but actually a few of these. And it brought up, what is happening? What is happening here? Why are we starting to see some of these anomalies? Probably not all explained by Google, probably not all explained by other factors we can control for, but I just wanted to, on the very surface, understand what had happened. In this particular institution, this is illustrative because I have seen this dozens of times. In June of 2012, these folks implemented a discovery service. And you can see that 2012 usage was climbing along kind of a little bit higher than 2011, then it started to drop. And in 2013, it stayed low through the first 6 months. So when I started to see stuff like this, I was like, so what's happening? What's actually causing this? Can we start to see what's going on here? If you are, we're fortunate in that for most of you and most of your institutions in here, your cost per use for JSTOR is extremely low. So when if we see a big drop in usage, the impact is probably smaller than another publisher where maybe your cost per use is higher. If they were seeing drops in usage like 25%, that would be very worrying for them. And so what we wanted to see from our perspective was, what's happening here? Why is it happening? What are we doing wrong? If we're doing something wrong, what is it that we're doing wrong? And how do we take some corrective actions to make it better? Okay, so what we said is, let's go find out what's happening. So the first thing we did back in May is we sent out a simple little survey to all of our participating institutions and said, hey, tell us what discovery service you're using and when you implemented it. Well, we got a pretty small number of responses, 422, but there were no consistent implementation dates. Some people said, I think we implemented at the end of 2011. We think we implemented in the spring of 2012. You know, just there's nothing we could actually attach a date to and actually begin to measure usage on either side of that. So then we went to Marshall Breeding's database because we knew that he was sort of tracking which institutions had which discovery services and which link resolvers. And you know, we were able to increase the pool of institutions by quite a bit, but there weren't really consistent implementation dates in that database. So, and it increased the number of things that people said was their discovery service. And that was interesting. But what we figured out is that we actually have to go to each of the discovery providers and really ask them, tell us who your customers are, tell us when you implemented them, and let's see if we can begin to look at usage. And not just usage one time, but let's do this so we can start to have some longitudinal data to look at to understand how this is changing and if it's changing over time. So we worked directly with EBSCO, with Ex Libris, OCLC, and ProQuest to get their customer database and implementation dates. That was, people were very supportive of this, but it was also very challenging. They're not used to just handing that information over to somebody. And so while they're supportive, very supportive, I should say, of the effort of what we're trying to understand here, it did take time. It took time to find out, to get this information, to get it, for us to be able to process this and do something with it. And this just gives you a sense of the scale of things. So if I take Discovery Service A here, they gave us almost 5,000 institutions. We were able to match about 3,100 of them in our data warehouse. About 1,800 of them were JSTOR participants. About 925 of them were in higher education. And that's kind of the pool from which we wanted to begin to look at. We were really focused on higher education here. So we had different sets of data from different sets of people, and they were very, very supportive of this. We were able to get the data in, and this is what I'm showing you today is sort of the first pass at what we were able to pull out. So let me say something before I start showing you numbers, all right? This is really important. Statistics are like bathing suits. What they reveal is interesting. What they conceal is essential, okay? We're going to see some interesting things here, but really, the real imperative stuff is the next set of statistics that we start to look into, which is why we're seeing some of the baseline data you're going to see here. When we start to look specifically at institutions, specifically at how they have their settings set up in their discovery service or in their link resolvers. what type of institution they are. Are they a research library? Are they a liberal arts school? Are they public? Are they private? Are they in the United States? Are they in the UK? We're going to start looking at trends in all of these different archetypes to really try to understand if certain combinations of discovery service and link resolver behave differently in different types of institutions. And I think that's the thing that all of us in this community, ecosystem, libraries, content providers, and discovery service providers are really interested to begin to find out. So I don't know how many of you attended Michael Levine Clark and Jason Price's presentation yesterday morning, but this is dovetailing a little bit with what they're doing. I've talked a lot with Michael, and we're providing them some data for what they're doing. And we're going to see about how we can dovetail these things in a way that begin to provide a holistic picture. But they're really looking at it from the institutional level, and I'm trying to look at it from a content provider perspective, because we really haven't heard a lot about what the impact of these things is with content providers. I'm just trying to begin to start that conversation. Okay, so we took these lists of JSTOR participants, and we then took the implementation date. And the reason I have the implementation date highlighted there is this is an incredibly important caveat. This is the implementation date that the discovery provider put to us. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean, I came to find out, that this is actually when the system was turned on. This could have been when they decided to click on the JSTOR collections, but it may have taken 6 more months for the service to actually go into full production. So I say these are the dates we had, these are the dates that we're working from, but they're imperfect. And so I want to make clear that to everybody. But what we tried to do was look at, much like Michael Levine Clark and Jason Price and them did, tried to look at the usage for 12 months before that implementation date, the average monthly usage at JSTOR, and the average monthly usage for the 12 months after the implementation date. Now, what we also did for a baseline is look at what the JSTOR change in usage was for all of JSTOR higher education institutions over that same time frame, whether they had a discovery service excuse me, or not. And we see from that period, from August 2009 to September 2012, the average monthly usage change was minus 3.2%. So that gives you a baseline of kind of what just overall in JSTOR was happening. When you look at the discovery providers and looking at those same set of institutions over that time, you can see that they all drop. Some at a smaller percentage than overall JSTOR, some right at that percentage, some at a little bit higher percentage. The one thing I want to say here is that Discovery Service C, it's too small a sample. It's just too small for us to make any judgments from, but we had the data from them. I wanted to make sure that we included it in here. And we're going to have to figure out how to actually work with a broader set of data as we move later on here. But this just gives you the post-implementation change that we saw. And this was in U.S. higher education. Okay? Now, when we look worldwide at higher education, so this is U.S. and everywhere else in the world, the average JSTOR usage change was just about flat, just about 1% drop for that same time period. And this is what it looked like for the discovery services. The differentials are smaller. Again, I have to actually probably throw out Discovery Service C because that sample's too small. But it compressed the change that we saw in a significant way. So that was interesting. But what we really wanted to start to look at was, were there differences by different types of JSTOR institutions, a very large institution versus a very small. And so in the limited time that we had, we decided, well, let's just look at JSTOR classifications that way. And let's see what kind of changes we saw. So I know this side may be hard to see because of the podium. But for the 1,600 JSTOR institutions that are in this sample, you can see that we have, very large to very small. So very large, large, medium, small, and very small is how this goes across. When you look at the discovery services, you can see the differences are all over the board. Some went up, some went down. And to me, this is the really interesting piece. For instance, if you look at Discovery Service B and the larges that went up 7.1%, there's 15 institutions in there. I really want to dig into those 15 institutions. What was there any commonalities amongst those 15? You know, were they all a particular type of institution? Did they all have a particular type of link resolver? As you saw earlier this morning, were there some real outliers that we really need to take out of this because it's the $1 million home in the poor neighborhood? And so we really want to dig into these numbers a lot deeper, but you can see that there's really some differences amongst these things, just at the very broad looking at it. Now for us, this is really interesting because up to this point, we have treated these discovery services all the same. We provide them with metadata, all the same metadata. We don't provide them with full text for the journal content. And our syndication was like once a quarter coming out to these guys, right? And I'm going to go into why that's a problem later on and some of the changes that we've had to make internally ourselves. Now, when we look worldwide in higher education, you can see that the JSTOR numbers differ a little bit and actually are a little bit smaller. And for some reason, I used orange instead of red. I can't explain why. But you can see, again, there's differentials in almost every JSTOR class. So really want to, we've got good sample sizes for this. It's really important that we begin to, in our next phase of this, to dig into these things to actually see, again, what those commonalities are and what they aren't, so that we can start to understand the differentials a little bit better. Okay, so what did we really pull out of this? Because this was really less about them, the discovery service providers, and more about us. What is happening here? And while we were looking at usage data, for 9 months before that, we spent a lot of time with each of these providers on the phone, in conversations, understanding how the relevancy ranking works, how they're using our data, what could we be doing differently to actually make the JSTOR content more valuable within those services. So these are generic things that we found out that work across all of these services. Subject metadata matters a lot. For relevancy for all of these services, subject metadata is critical. Now you have to remember, JSTOR started as being, our mission was the long-term preservation of these journals. We were building our metadata for preservation purposes, not for access purposes. So we have very limited subject metadata into what we're providing to the providers. That has to change. We have to put much more robust metadata in here, and we're actually working on methodologies to actually do that. We have to go back through 10 million articles and populate them with metadata that is going to be useful for people when they're doing discovery within these services. That's not an inexpensive proposition to do, okay? So, but it's important. It's really important. And to us, it's actually much more important than providing full text, all right? It's a bit of a proposition that I'm testing. I think full text will give you more results. I don't know that it'll give you more relevant results. So we're going to be doing some testing by giving some full text to and testing out, does it actually provide more relevant results when we see content accesses coming to JSTOR. And we're going to start running that test at the beginning of next year. And if it works, if it's important, if full text shows that it's a lot better, we're going to figure out a way to give full text to these providers. You have to understand, we're not a publisher. We do not own the rights to that. So if we're going to do that, we need to talk to 1,000 publishers who are participating in JSTOR and get their buy-in. I don't think it will be a problem, but I want to have some data to back up why we want to do this. It's really important. So subject metadata, we're going to begin doing, we've begun doing things and trying to get that much more robust than it is today. The second point is that it became very clear to us from our interviews with really dozens of libraries that libraries don't spend enough time configuring these systems. Most of them they come out of the box in the default setting, and that's how libraries have them, right? Now, I realize there's a lot of institutions that don't have staff to do this, but they do minimal configuration, if any, and that really can create some issues, because in some of these systems, you actually have to say, turn on JSTOR, right? And if you haven't done that, you're not going to see any JSTOR results. It's as simple as that. And I think other publishers are dealing with that too. Link resolver configuration is critical. These two things work hand in hand. And your link resolver and your discovery service have to be in sync. And in many of the things that we looked at, they just weren't. There was not an understanding that the link resolver was overriding some of the discovery service stuff. And I think we definitely need some better education, be able to provide people with more information on these things. And that is why one of the first things that we're working on in JSTOR out of this is a set of guides that we can provide to libraries that say, if you're using Summon and you're using SFX as your link resolver, here are the things that you would need to do in those systems if you actually want your JSTOR content to show up and show up more prominently. Now, many libraries will say, I don't want to bother with that, that's fine, but I want to make sure at least that we've put that information out there so they have a choice of doing that. They understand changing the default has this impact. So we're going to begin working on that series of combinations. So I guess there'll be 16 of those in some way that we'll be putting out to libraries so that they at least have the information on the side. And to us, a lot of libraries in this room have made a pretty significant investment in JSTOR over the past 15 years. And they think it's an important resource, so we want to make sure at least we've put information out there about how you can make sure this stuff is actually discoverable within these systems in a more relevant way. Another really big thing for us, and we have now spent the last 6-8 months rebuilding the way that we syndicate content out to these services. The way we were doing it before was completely insufficient. We were sending the same data to everyone on a quarterly basis. We've now rebuilt a system that is going to be able to differentiate, are we sending you archive content versus current content from our current scholarship program, which might need to come out daily or weekly, versus books content on our system, which may need to come out as often as that. And being able to differentiate what we send to discovery providers depending on what works best in their system. And so having a syndication program for this and not treating everyone as everything is just a square peg, pounding into a round hole, I think is going to be important. And this is, again, another significant investment for this organization to do, to rebuild this system, to be able to do these things in this way. So I think it's important that all content's not the same, so it needs to be treated differently within these systems and actually put forward to these systems in ways that are specific to that kind of content. But also, it's important that we have really good substantial KBART files for these link resolvers, because the tying of 100,000 books in JSTOR, people aren't going to go through and select 100,000 books in their administrative modules. So how do we do that in a way that's going to be really easy for the libraries, and same thing with journals, so that's a much simpler process than what it is in many other instances. So syndication of data, getting our subject metadata much more up to speed for access purposes are the two big takeaways from this first set of analysis for us. Also, building the library guide so that we can start to inform libraries a lot better on how these combinations work with JSTOR, I'd say was the third thing that really came out of that. Our next steps here are really quite simple. Besides doing the work I just mentioned, we're going to continue to dig into this usage, and we're going to continue to look at these different archetypes by different discovery types, so that we can start to see, are there any commonalities there that we can inform the community about. And the discovery providers are very interested to get this. I have to say, you know, sometimes I butt heads with these folks quite a bit, but they were wonderful in working in this. We went through these presentations with many of them. They had incredibly good feedback on this stuff. They provided some very useful things for us to think about in our next round of research. And I really wanted this to be a collaborative thing. I didn't want this to be a we versus them, you know, finger pointing exercise. I really wanted this to be, if these things are new, they're still relatively new. And whatever we can learn from them for the benefit of the community is going to be good. We need to do that together. It can't be something where we're putting stuff out and people are saying, well, that's wrong because of this or that's wrong because of that. We need to actually build on this together. This is imperfect. It's a first. It's a start. Just like the guy said yesterday morning, this is a start. This is a start for us. But we really want to understand that because in the type of organization that we are, small not-for-profit organization, we have to think hard about where those investments are going, right? And I want to make sure we're doing things that are smart and not just doing them based on some set of anecdotal evidence that we may have. So I'm going to stop there. That's the essence of my presentation, and happy to take any questions that people have from the audience. Yes, sir. Very good. They're recording this, so to capture you in perpetuity.
ProQuest. I'm wondering, what do you expose to the Google crawler?
We expose our full text to the Google crawler, or some semblance of the full text.
So in other words, so the discovery systems are getting metadata only, but Google's getting
Yes.
full text.
Right.
So in some sense, it's a mixed bag there, a little bit of apples and oranges on.
A little bit of apples and oranges. The only thing I'd say is different about Google is that we have probably, last year, I'm trying to think, close to 200, we had close to 20 million turnaways. So while we get a lot more referrals from Google, a lot of them are unauthenticated, right? Because what does the full text actually just put more JSTOR results in there that they can come to us from?
Well, I would assume so, because in the case of the subject metadata, you mentioned that was really important, but that would only matter if the user's query was actually matched a subject.
Right.
In other words, there's so many user queries that have no direct connection, or it may actually combine multiple words from multiple subject headings.
Right.
So in fact, it wouldn't have as big an impact in all those queries to start with.
And that's one of the things we
Yeah.
want to test.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sure
Yeah.
you have data that tells you that. We want to actually look
Yeah.
at that data ourselves.
The second thing, I wondered on the segmented data from where the referring source was. Have you segmented that out from the point of view of a user session? So
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So you know then for any given user coming in, that represents, is that aggregating at a session level, or is it aggregating for each return of a document?
This is aggregated at the actual individual content access level, not
Okay.
at the session level.
So do you know, have you segmented that? So you know, though, how many, on average, how many documents a user
Yes.
might get?
Yeah.
Have you segmented out that against these categories?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
That's a next step of this as well.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Laura Brown's playing Phil
Hi.
Donahue. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks, yeah. John Dove from Credo Reference. Bruce, you can probably guess what I'm going to ask. It's similar, perhaps, to the same line of questioning, which is distinguishing between known item searches and exploratory searches. So clearly, the link resolvers are pretty much all, I mean, I would assume they'd all be known item searches.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that disambiguating those two things could be really
Yes.
influential in terms of seeing, is the problem discovery or is the problem, with something else? So.
Yeah, I mean, John, that's a great point. If you look at our system and you look at the top 200 searches, almost none of them are known item searches. they're all things like Civil War and stuff like that. And I think, Mike, even you were telling me one of the top searches in Summon is JSTOR, right? So, or Facebook or something like that. So I think that's yeah, it's a really important point of trying to differentiate those known item things versus just the general things that are being searched upon. Again, there's a lot into this data that we can start to dig into and really understand that a little bit better.
Susan Hurst, Miami University of Ohio. How are some of the fixes that you're talking about? Have you got any ideas about why that varies so much by size of school?
Yeah.
Because none of those fixes would really affect it. The discovery service would be basically the same for a large school versus a small school. So, why are sometimes the small schools JSTOR is going up, but it's not for the big schools? I mean, any ideas?
I don't have any firm ideas at this point. I would say this, that at the smaller schools, perhaps JSTOR is one of the next things we're going to do is that chart I was showing you that shows where origins start. We're going to break that down by JSTOR class. So we're going to see, do more people start at JSTOR at a very small school than start at a very large school? That's one of the first things that we need to look at. We need to understand where do the starting points, the origins of these things change by different type of institution.
But then wouldn't it be the same for all very small schools or all very large schools? I mean, in every category, you've got some going up, some going down. It just seems crazy.
Well, I know, but it's also a question of we need to sort through the 15 or the 11 or the 10 to see if there's like some big outliers in there that are like skewing the numbers, right? But I think really, to me, understanding the beginning of that is to understand this chart better by JSTOR class. Sorry, keep going front and back. Does this change? This is for all JSTOR institutions. Does this actually change? Is there more stuff coming from Google at your institution or your size of institution than, say, a very large research Harvard type of place? What's the differentials there? And we haven't looked at that yet.
But it does, I guess I'm just saying that in every column, so in the medium-sized schools, some went up, some went down.
Yes.
So if you're saying that medium-sized schools, people tend to do more one or the other, it should be the same.
Well, that's what we have to.
Yeah, okay.
We have to find out.
Sure.
I'm just thinking about base, just anecdotal things right now. Yes, in the very back.
Hi, I'm Lisa Hooper from Tulane University. I had two things. One is a yes, please, and keep doing this, but please also do this. And the other one is a question, if I might. So you're absolutely right. Libraries do need guidance on implementation. So I think that's fantastic that you're developing guidelines to help us. That's awesome. But so many of us are doing this with so few resources to begin with. So us trying to go out to all of our individual databases and say, hey, do you have any guidelines? It's a little bit asking too much. So if instead or also in addition to, you could talk to the Discovery Service providers and get them to provide the actual documentation or at least put your documentation in their knowledge base, that would be awesome. Okay, and then so my question.
Good idea.
Yeah, sorry. You probably already had that idea. But my questions, I couldn't help but notice in this presentation, and probably because of time, probably for other reasons, I couldn't help but notice that you didn't mention the possibility that the discovery layer itself is actually exposing researchers to more current research that they can get than they can get through JSTOR. And I'm curious, have you looked at this or are you planning to look at it?
I think it's something we have to begin to look at. I was telling someone yesterday, I feel like I was one of those commercials during the football games where I could literally say something for 5 seconds and then give you 55 seconds of caveats of, don't take this when you're pregnant, don't do this, it's like, because there's so many, one of the things that's really important here is when you look at those numbers, we want to be able to control them for like the change in Google. Like the things that happened in Google, we need to be able to control for these things that we know happened. And and see does it actually, we can't make a direct correlation here right now between a drop in usage and an implementation of a discovery service, right? What we can see is some trending happening. Now let's start controlling for certain things and see if there is a correlation like they were trying to get to yesterday morning. I didn't want to bore you with ANOVAs and all this other stuff because you got that lesson yesterday. But we need to start doing more of that, and that's what I want to link up with Michael Levine Clark and his group on, is to start looking at those things. But yes, it's incredibly important to remember that there are lots of caveats in this, and the other thing is I don't think you can really take JSTOR's experience and express it amongst a whole broader group of publishers. I just don't think you can, because of the weird brand recognition that JSTOR has amongst faculty and students. I just think they know, many of them know what JSTOR is. So they may not know what the small society is or the small university press. And so I want to be careful about that. So, but we need to start looking deeper into the thing you just mentioned exactly. Yes, ma'am.
My journal, the Journal of Economic Perspectives, became free online, and when I looked at the statistics for usage, of course, our online usage, doubled, and also we put up all the back issues, and many journals are putting up their back issues, and so I'm thinking that probably has something to do with it.
Yeah.
But I was going to say that JSTOR numbers, plummeted, but didn't totally go away. Like, some people are still using JSTOR, even though you could go and get it free at our site. But I don't know if the discovery service would tell them, oh, it's free over here, and over here you might have to pay.
Yeah, I think the other thing I want to be clear about is that, and I'm sure if you talk to any of the discovery providers, they would tell you, yes, usage may look like it was trending down at JSTOR for JSTOR, but it was probably trending up for 85% of the other publishers or 90% of the other publishers. So what our experience isn't necessarily reflective of what maybe some of the smaller publishers are that have seen. But let me say this too, that the other important thing here is that we want to be able to break out the use of the archive collections versus the use of the current scholarship titles, because they may actually look a little bit different as well, and that's important. Yes, sir.
I work with some small excuse me. I work with some small society publishers that have been blaming. I'm Doug Lafreniere. Sorry, I'm a consultant for some small society publishers, and they've been blaming Google for their downturn in in hits lately. And is this effect of discovery services well understood by publishers now?
Well, we just had the Ithaca Sustainable Scholarship meeting 2 weeks ago, and I had a number of publishers come up to me after a similar presentation saying they had not really spent much time on this topic. So my guess is that for many of them they haven't. For some they certainly have, but I just think this is an education process as well. I really believe that. Amira.
Amira Aaron, Northeastern University. So as part of an education process, first of all, I want to applaud you for working with all of the discovery services. I think that we have a very serious problem because content providers and vendors are not playing equally with each other. And discovery services will never be what we want them to be as long as that's the case. So I'm imploring you, whatever you can do, to encourage publishers, vendors to play fairly with each other. We have a real problem because many content providers are now also hosting discovery systems. It's not working. And they're really refusing to play with each other. And only we, the libraries, can bring about a change. So I'm imploring libraries to do something about this problem, and I'm imploring you, because you work with so many of the discovery services and the vendors, to keep that in mind and just keep pushing for it. So
Very
thank you,
useful.
Bruce.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm William Gunn. I'm from Mendeley, and I just had a comment that we at Mendeley have looked at the difference in relevancy for recommendations from metadata only and full text, and we actually find that in our specific case, the full text makes a huge difference in the quality and the relevance of the rankings. Not sure how applicable it is, but I'd love to chat more about that later.
Yeah. Thank you. Up here, Laura.
Melissa Belvati from the University of Prince Edward Island. It seems to me that JSTOR is either absolutely unique or pretty close to it in, unlike all the other publishers involved that are partners with our discovery services, in that your content is not uniquely hosted on your server, and that the Journal of Economic Perspectives lady touched on this, but I want to pull it out a bit further in terms of why JSTOR may uniquely experience this problem where other publishers won't, because there are other sources of the full text, which is not in any way to say that JSTOR becomes unnecessary to our libraries, because you're probably the only one that we can trust in the long term. But so short-term linking and immediate access for the undergraduate within the discovery service, they may very well be pulling. So my question or suggestion to you is, in terms of analysis and working with the discovery services, is not just to look at accesses of the content to JSTOR, but look title by title to see if us as customers, our access to those titles, the Journal of Economic Perspectives and so forth, run through all the titles in JSTOR and say, is the full text access to those titles within those discovery services going up or down?
Right. I think that's one of the reasons I want to tie in with Michael Levine Clark's work, because we want to actually look at those 40 libraries and what their JSTOR impact was, or the titles in JSTOR impact was across, so you can actually see, may have gone down at JSTOR, may have gone up somewhere else, and try to understand that a little better too.
Hi, I'm Stephen Rintut from Alexander Street Press. We're a small publisher, and frankly, we see similar numbers to this. And much of our content's unique, but I'd just like to reiterate a lot of what Bruce is saying, because when we look as to why the numbers are actually going down, I think there's a tacit, or actually an explicit acknowledgement that more usage is better. But for many, many types of searches, all people are really looking for is an article or an item. And actually, it may very well be that they've been successful in finding that one article or two articles for their particular subject. And of course, the faculty and perhaps we as publishers and librarians would love it if they got more into depth and found the best article. But it being the nature of students, if they find two or three. So for me, one of the biggest questions we're looking at here is the underlying assumption that more usage is better usage. If I'm a student, I want to go in there, get my article, get out. Actually, less usage is way better for me. So I think it's really, really important that we do the work and make sure that the great content that we all collectively cherish floats to the top, and that necessitates a great deal of work. But speaking as a vendor that has a lot of formats that don't correspond to standard discovery services, one of the huge challenges is this is a great deal of work. See Jane and Jim McGinty sitting over there from ProQuest. It's hugely expensive. And for many of these vendors, the amount of work required to actually get the content to be able to float to the top is no small engineering task. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. I appreciate everyone's time. My dad told me many years ago, if you can't stun them with your brilliance, overwhelm them with data. So I think I've sufficiently done that. So, thank you all. Enjoy yourselves.